Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Collective. I apologize about the intro thing. My mouse button got stuck. So,
It's a bit of deja
Deja.
vu, though. That was a little bit of Matrix time.
It was
Is
a
that a black cat?
little crazy, but it's every so often we like to get crazy. It's a pretty crazy show, right? It's not all about hard, difficult topics that are hard hitting and powerful. Sometimes it's just about deja vu in the intro. Anyway, while I'm trying to explain myself, everybody else should probably be liking the show, hitting the subscribe button, hitting the notification bell, doing all of that good stuff. Now, again, June, men's mental health month. So we are spending every day talking about different facets of men's mental health. And as a precursor, some of the topics that we get into can be kind of heavy, for lack of a better term, but we're all going to do our best, as Shaun is doing right now, to make these topics accessible. That's the big part. If at any point in time we are talking and you find yourself to getting uncomfortable or perhaps triggered about something that we're talking about, bounce, as Shaun likes to say. After that, talk to a friend or calm yourself. You can come back to this later or not. If you have any questions, put them in the description or in the comment section here. We will read them out and we'll discuss them. And if you have any other questions that we aren't qualified to answer, as none of us are doctors, ask a doctor. Go talk to a professional, and they will have some answers for you. Anything off the top of your guys' head that I missed, or perhaps need to bring up before we get started?
Maybe just real quick. Yeah, we're not doctors, but we do have some between either personal experience or associated experiences of acquaintances or friends or family. I think that we have a perspective that, though maybe not medical, is certainly personal experience with PTSD from a different vector, which is a maybe non-professional vector, we'll call it, that still has insight, still has relevancy, will still be of benefit to others.
Yeah, couldn't agree more on that one. That's fantastic. Quick couple comments. Nazgul Leland, what's up? Good to see you here. Dr. C, do conspiracy month in July. Oh dear, that would go down a rabbit hole. Would that ever go down a rabbit hole?
Well, we'll see you on July 6th, Doc.
July 6th, there you go. Yeah, we'll get him on.
No, we're on his podcast.
Oh, that's right. We're on his podcast, and we will talk about every conspiracy we can possibly imagine.
Bringing conspiracies.
He says, I won't be able to list consistently, but I have seen some great benefits with psychedelics and PTSD. That's a great point. We're going to have Chad on for Mental Joe at some point this next week coming up. So we'll be talking about psychedelics as well at some point in the future. Steve, new face. Can you tell us about yourself, your history, your background a little bit in 30 seconds or less? What do you got?
Yeah, absolutely. Quickly, though, I just want to say, fellas, I've been listening to the podcast over the last 3 days. Very well spoken, very thoughtful, and I love your application of like a tactical battle procedure mindset to real life, because every soldier understands battle procedure, and it doesn't just work in the field. It, as you guys have described, it works for everything. Really appreciate that approach. Yeah, my name is Steve Ferry. I'm a firefighter with the city of Edmonton. I was in the Canadian military for 17 years. I started in the 1st Battalion PPCLI. Got a taste for pre-hospital and tactical medicine and did a component transfer in 2004 to the medical trade. I spent most of my time in 1 brigade and then was a medic at JTF2 before retiring at 1 Field Am and moving to the city.
Outstanding.
So no fantastic.
Big deal. Well, we really appreciate you being here. It's you came highly recommended by some of our friends, and we're looking forward to having a chat.
Awesome.
Now, what we're going to be talking about today, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, there's a lot of discussion around whether or not this should be labeled as a disorder or not. There's a lot of symptomology that is laid under the tree of post-traumatic stress, and we're not going to be we don't have enough time to go into all of the facets that post-traumatic stress actually encompasses, but we're going to do our best to talk about this openly and honestly, and hopefully come up with some useful tools to not only manage but mitigate some issues, as well as how to move forward, live life. So I'm going to call on you, Shaun, because you are half robot, let's say, maybe a quarter robot, and lay some groundwork for us on, what PTSD is in your opinion, and then we'll carry on the conversation.
Well, that is interesting because referring to me as a partial robot, the first thing I'd like to clear up is I do have a pretty tight robot dance.
That is pretty
So
sick.
there's that. The other piece is, speaking of robots, so I was formally diagnosed with PTSD. I didn't know I had it. I didn't even know how to spell it at one point. But then once I was told, you do exhibit the symptoms of PTSD, and therefore you are officially designated as PTSD. My response, as I've said before, within about 3 seconds was, okay, good. And the psychiatrist said, what do you mean good? She'd apparently never had a response like that. And I said, well, good. Now I know what it is. What does that even mean to you? Well, now I can get on with crushing it, beating it, defeating it. And apparently that's the first time she'd ever heard that response. I don't know what she thinks of me now, because I pursued improvement at a fairly rapid pace by counteracting PTSD, for lack of a better term. So that's what I knew about PTSD. Nothing when I was told I had it. And to make the robot reference, I will say this, that for part of my life, I had to be a little bit of a robot to isolate some of the symptoms, we'll call them, or the challenges of PTSD that I was having. As I've stated in the past, not constantly, but from time to time, I will say that the reason that I spoke to my doctor about, I'm just not sleeping well every night. Well, how long's that been going on? For a couple of decades. Well, what does that even mean? Nightmares every night. So you've been having nightmares for over 2 decades every night. Yeah. Isn't that normal? No, it isn't. And so that's how the conversation kind of went. And so preceding all of that, like I had to kind of robot up a little bit. A part of me had to be robotic and kind of deal with life in a kind of compartmentalized robotic fashion, that I had to strip out all emotions and just function kind of like a robot to some degree in some aspects of my life. And when you're doing that, you don't know you're doing it until you've got hindsight and look back and think, oh, wow, I guess I was doing that. So it's not amusing. It's interesting that you've made the reference to robotic, because I still do exhibit some robotic symptoms, I suppose, in certain aspects, but that's probably a formed response over a couple of decades of being used to being a semi-robot. Does that make sense?
100%. And the reason why I wanted to call you on this was the fact that I know that the moment they told you that you had post-traumatic stress, that you went out and started researching it immediately.
I did.
And you started, I imagine, immediately started trying to mitigate the issues therein on that day.
As Steve would understand, I got to work as a tier 1 operator against the problem. So can you give us a definition based on what you know? Or Seb, can you give us a definition of post-traumatic stress?
I'm going to go ahead and say that the expert in the house is Steve here.
What do you think, Steve? You got a definition?
Well, yeah. Actually, I do have a take on that, and I think the important thing is that there is no definition of PTSD. A lot of times we try to define it with things like combat or some type of violent incident. It doesn't have to be that. It can just be one of the worst days of my military career was just on a drive where I was scared. Nothing happened on that drive, but I think about it a lot. And then there's things that can help mitigate it. You know, as a combat medic, we were trained and expected to give very early aggressive pain control in order to help our friends down the road. Not only were we trying to save their lives at the point of injury, but we were trying to save their mental health down the road. We know as well that brain injuries can affect PTSD. There's no definition. It affects everyone differently. It's not a military problem or a police problem. It's a people problem. And as soon as we try to put a definition on it, I think we take away from some of the folks who truly suffer from it.
That's perfect. That's exactly what I was hoping somebody would hit. That there really isn't there's a medical definition, but the best thing that I've ever heard that actually kind of describes it is that it's a survival mechanism, in that your body will react to certain stimulus in a certain way based off of previous experience.
Yeah.
That's basically the best thing I've heard of it, and it's so generalized that it encompasses basically everything.
Well, it does.
It is a massive subject.
Yeah.
I do know that for sure. I've barely touched on it. I've tried to see one side of it and the other side of it, all the boundaries of it. And I've probably only scraped the surface, but over the time period that I've been trying to absorb it as much as I can, there's just so much space out there, so much battle space out there on the subject that I might only know 10% of it right now. And I have been ferocious in pursuing the information on PTSD.
Yeah. So now, Len, let's talk about our own personal experiences then with PTSD, and how not only do we manage it, not only how do we mitigate it, but how it presents itself, I guess, in ourselves. So I will go first, obviously, but for me, post-traumatic stress came in a number of ways. One of the first ones was actually very similar to Shaun. I wasn't sleeping, and I was sleeping maybe 4 hours a night, intermittently between waking up and having nightmares and all these other things. And then it slowly started to present itself more in terms of hypervigilance, avoidance, anger, fear, rage, those kinds of things, as well as depression and anxiety and a whole slew of other factors. And what I found, at least over time, was that I couldn't tackle all of the things at once. And that was the big challenge, because right off the bat, when I got told I had PTSD, I wanted to, okay, let's solve this problem. I'm going to do this, and it's all going to work out. Or I was looking for the magic button, the pill that's going to make sure everything is groovy. What I found over time was that I had to focus on one thing and work that down slowly to the point that I could manage that, and then I could start on something else. For instance, crowds. That was one of my biggest triggers right off the bat. I did not like being surrounded by people, which came from the fact that through my training and through my time in Afghanistan, crowds were one of the biggest dangers I could imagine, because it's a completely uncontrolled environment, and you have multiple angles of attack. And so I went into an immediate defensive posture and was constantly scanning into a hypervigilant state. And what I had to do with that, and I'm just going to go into this one particular facet, what I had to do with that was slowly put myself in those positions over time to reacclimatize my brain to being okay in a crowd. So I started with 3 people, and I would let somebody get behind me, and I would feel all of the emotions, all of the energy start to build up, and I would have to control that, slow it down, accept the situation, and move through it. And slowly that changed into one of I had this happen actually this last Sunday. It was a achievement for me because I was very excited about it. I walked through Costco on a Sunday afternoon at its busiest, and I walked through it. I didn't get upset, didn't get agitated, didn't get angry, didn't get any of those feelings. I started to get stressed. I managed my stress, and we carried on through the day, and we carried on through the whole way through. And I have not been able to do that up until this point. Normally, I would even hit I can't say normally, let me rephrase that. Previously, I would have hit the parking lot, saw that it was extremely busy, and been like, nope, and out. And so the reason I went into this whole diatribe on this was the fact to explain that it's a really in-depth, extended issue that you have to basically retrain yourself how to do these small things over maybe a large span of time, at least for me. But and that goes into every other issue along with it that I've had to do over time, slowly work through each piece.
Maybe.
So, well, that's what I've done. That's what I'm saying.
That's right. Yeah, maybe, maybe for you and maybe not for another person.
Absolutely.
And I don't know, because I haven't talked to 1,000 people with PTSD and deeply understood their journey to some degree. And so I'm going to ask you guys. I know what mine is like. Chance has just described what it was like for him. How different does it present itself from guy to guy or girl to girl or whatever the case is? I think it's, from what I understand and what I've loosely seen out there, it can present as, for lack of a better term, really bad or not too bad. And so, Steve, I'd like to ask you, since you'd be a guy who'd be presenting or seeing this presented in a variety of different ways. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks. I've actually never had too many of the symptoms of PTSD. I'm very lucky. I've had one nightmare in my life from my military career. I've actually sought out these experiences and embraced them, and they've never had a negative effect on me. Now, again, this is a affects different people at different times. But what I have been is a third party or a second party, I'm not sure what it is, to people who have been experiencing it. And I think that you gentlemen know as well as I do that at best, PTSD can take someone out of the fight for a while. At worst, it can end with them taking their own life. I've been part of the full spectrum of the mental health evolution. I think that's really started happening in like the early 2000s, where I was in the infantry when you didn't really say too much, and I thought that was normal, to the point now where I often wonder if we've taken it too far and we're leaving the people who are really sick behind, because we're so worried about, if you experience something negative, you're sick. One of the big things that I've always thought about was my first deployment to Afghanistan. I came back and we had to do our decompression. And in my mind, I was kind of like, I don't need to decompress. I need to see my kids. I don't want to stop in Cyprus. I want to go home. But we're gonna have this stop and we're gonna do it. And I sat down for my first briefing. And if you saw something that made you feel upset, you were sick. If you weren't upset, you were also sick. And I started this journey with being like, well, how am I supposed to feel? And we've tried to put those parameters on something that just doesn't exist that way. I mean, Chance has spoke about crowds. That's a very common one. I can go into a crowd and go right into the red and be good, but as soon as I walk out of it, I can go right back in the white. And I'm very fortunate to have experienced that. But that's kind of my take, is that it can manifest in so many different ways. And one of the things about being a medic for all those years attached to a ground force is not only are you there to put bandages on bullets, you're there to be my confidant about things that have made people upset. And that was always part of my career that I really enjoyed, is that people will always trust the medic. And that is it's a very special bond. And I got to hear a lot of stories about things that were bothering people. And it didn't have to be the blood and the guts. It sometimes was, I'm just really tired, or I'm frustrated with leadership. These are all things that can add to not feeling well about an experience.
Yeah, that's a super important point. The idea being that no one needs to get shot at to be frustrated. And if you are frustrated, it's good to be able to talk to a guy like Steve. But then that guy gets out and Steve stays in the game and they separate ways. And 10 years later, that guy who may or may not have been struggling at that time, where you may or may not have been helpful, is now struggling because it's 10 years later or 9.7 years later, or whatever time it is that at some point you think, it's PTSD isn't going to affect me. And then one morning you wake up feeling just a bit off and you don't know why. And so the reason I'm saying that is PTSD is not a one and done thing. And it's not it has to happen right now because you just heard a bullet go past your head. It's a thing that can show up slowly, like a creepy creep sort of thing, many, many, many years later, when you're in your accounting job or whatever the case is. I don't want to say it's an unpredictable thing, but it's not so predictable that you can write down on a notepad, oh, someone just got shot at, so in 1.4 days they're gonna feel ... It doesn't work like that.
Yeah. Seb, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, and just to clarify, Steve, I didn't mean to be a poor battle buddy and throw you under the bus earlier, but I have seen a few of your posts and a few of your podcast appearances that you have been discussing the subject at great length before. So I just assumed that there was a level of expertise there that I couldn't match. So just like Steve, I fought PTSD and occupational stress injury by proxy. I was not affected myself by it, but I had to make sure that all the people that were required to sacrifice on account of the collective under me were doing so while being supported 100%. So for me, it's always been an extremely important part of me as a leader, developing the leaders under me, and the whole wellness as a whole. When I did some research project with the Chicago Police Department on account of trying to establish some protocol for us, some critical incident protocol that would reduce the amount of stress on our people. And one of the shocking revelation, and I've mentioned this before, one of the shocking revelations we had is that most of our people were suffering from sanctuary trauma, which is obviously them not having a safe place to come back to, or them being asked to do something very difficult that they're okay with doing, but not being supported after. And so what I started doing now is bringing back the responsibility of wellness to everyone. Because as we discussed in the last, I believe a couple of days ago, if in the briefing room, there's conversations going on about people that are away, that are not well, and other people are witnessing this, and now it has them think if anything's ever wrong with me, I never want to bring it up to anybody or whatever the case may be. And so my job has become to really empower the individual to be as good as they possibly can be, so that we may prevent PTSD internally and occupational stress injury, or mitigate it internally, instead of waiting for somebody with a magic wand to come over and fix things for us. And so that has been a giant piece of my journey through, duty related issues.
Yeah.
Also, what I have been doing over the course of the last two years as a performance coach is dealing with a lot of people that are reaching in, obviously following either critical incidents or just having some symptomology associated with PTSD, occupational stress injury, coming in, and negotiating the system in this country, as you know, can be extremely difficult. So if somebody does decide to reach out for help, you better tie your two cup with some barbed wire, because there's a lot that needs to be done in order to obtain the proper level of care in this country.
Mm-hmm. I think this is part of the problem, obviously, is that stigma, right? That thought that, and I mean, back when I got in, it would end your career. If you stood up and said, hey, I got post-traumatic stress, it would end your career. You'd be done. And so it really, I think it pushed a lot of people well past where they could get maybe an inroad before falling off the edge of the cliff, kind of deal. Winter Storm's got a...
And what's interesting is, in your career, in your generation, the word PTSD would end your career. But in my career, it didn't exist as a word.
Yeah.
Well, shell shock was used in World War II and World War I.
It's
right?
true.
Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah,
But the difference being that shell shock was, quote unquote, not a medical term.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Whereas PTSD is, quote unquote, a medical term. And all of a sudden it gains relevancy versus non-relevant shell shock. And I know that's not the way it's supposed to be, but that's the way that society kind of categorized it. And so, and then to Steve's point, PTSD to some degree has been not exacerbated, but has been evolved to a point where it is maybe over evolved, where someone who stubs their toe when they get off the plane as they step into Cyprus to decompress, that moment is now they're uncomfortable and they now have PTSD. And I'm drawing out an extreme case to make the point that I think that the medical term or the medical understanding that the reference to PTSD is important as a societal moment, but it's a moment that is maybe over evolving to some degree.
Yeah, it can become a defining, if it becomes a defining entity, and you have to remain within the parameters of that definition. You could foreseeably be in the wrong box and keep yourself in that box, and simply not take actions that are conducive to getting out of that specific box, because you may be in a box, but this one isn't yours. So now you're attributing things to your own personality, to your life, that may or may not be. If your life is miserable, I got some good news for you. Maybe you just have a miserable life right now on account of what's going on with you, and that should be empowering.
Yes. The other pieces that in respect to we'll call it the modern PTSD that we have right now, loosely understood by society as a whole, to Seb's point is there are people in society that have constructed their own version of PTSD understanding and are populating it out into the interwebs as this is what PTSD is for me, and this is what PTSD is for you. And so it's a loose categorization of a whole pile of things being put out there to the entire world as if you blink with just one eye instead of both eyes, you have PTSD. It's a sure sign. And so all of a sudden, we've got a planet that is being drawn into loose symptomology that may or may not be correct for that individual. And now they're aligning with the fact that they may have PTSD or they do have PTSD, and now they have to run their life in a certain way because I've been told that, ... And it's not a great way to run your program.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, is there any way I could add something to the perception comment? I thought was it's right at the top of my notes here. And the kind of analogy I want to draw was when I was a little boy, Remembrance Day was always fascinating to me. I'm old enough to have had World War I veterans talk in my school, and I would see these gentlemen go up there, and who knows what these gentlemen went through. I mean, we definitely had D-Day veterans in Ponoka that I saw later in life and stuff. But when I looked at those veterans, I admired them and I respected them and I wanted to be like them. What I've found in the last 10 years or so is that when people find out that you're an Afghan veteran, the first question they ask two questions. It's to a T. The first one they ask is, do you have PTSD? And I absolutely don't. The second question is, well, were you in any combat? And we've associated combat with mental illness. We've also associated Afghanistan with mental illness. And I don't want to be perceived as a veteran and pitied based on a conflict that I volunteered for and went back to. I want to be respected and appreciated for that sacrifice. And, for all the veterans out there who notice that stuff, just remember you're the exact same warrior you were in 2008. You're just a little bit older and fatter.
I am very much older and fatter, 100%.
Maybe a bit balder as well.
Balder, definitely balder. That's why I wear a hat all the time. Although those two things might be coinciding with each other. But we got a great comment here from Winterstorm. It says, is the fear of diagnosis keeping people away from help? And if it is, what can we do to get people over that initial fear so that they can move past the definition and onto treatment? And I think this is a great point that he brings up, is that moving past the definition is that personally, this took me a while. Once I got diagnosed with post-traumatic stress, that became the new uniform for a number of years, actually. I was the broken soldier for a bit. And over time, I was able to move past that definition, and that it was treatment that helped me get past that definition. And then once I was past the definition, I could move on from that. So I just wanted to make sure that was brought up, because that is a big part of it, is moving past it. But do you guys think the fear of diagnosis of somebody actually going like, oh no, now I have PTSD, keeps them from help? What do you guys think?
I think there's 3 phases, actually. Yeah. And I don't think these existed 20 years ago. I think there's a phase of people that don't want it. There's a phase of people that have it and are trying to get out of it. And there's a phase of people who wouldn't mind having it based on the benefits or the whatever, based on the idea that someone is going to treat them in a more sensitive way, or in a way they're going to get wrapped in a bubble and hugged. I don't know, but this is what I see as a phenomenon out there. Is some people take some time to get right with it. Some people get right with it pretty quickly, and some people want to be in the game of PTSD.
Mm-hmm. It's true. Seb or Steve, you got any thoughts?
Yeah,
no, that
like,
was perfectly
Steve.
said. Yeah, excuse
Go
me,
ahead,
Seb.
Steve.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to. I couldn't agree more. That was an excellent take, Shaun. Excellent.
Thank you.
Seb?
Yeah, ultimately, it can be a crutch for some. There is no question that that's the case. And it's not that it's a crutch that they're trying to get sympathy or anything like that, but perhaps to have to deal with certain things that may or may not have even been pre-existing prior to their service. And there's and we are built for survival. Our memories are closely tied into the emotions that we felt at the time of a certain event, and everything in us is wired to prevent us from re-experiencing an experience that we have perceived as being life-threatening. So it's really interesting when the fight or flight and submit, which is often forgotten, but the fight or flight kicks in, and now essentially you can get to a point where you are lining up through your frontal cortex the memories associated with a certain event so that it fits the narrative, and that becomes cognitive bias. And it's very dangerous, because that's the principle of manifestation. If you break up with someone today and they leave you, and they drive a blue Honda CRV, when you hit the road, you're going to see blue Honda CRV everywhere. And it's not because Honda started creating and producing more blue Honda CRV. It's because you're aligning your actions with your thoughts, and you have cognitive bias now. So you're taking everything around you and making it a part of the situation that you're in. So those are traps that can easily be fell into if we just take a moniker at face value with no context whatsoever, no particular attention to the specific set of circumstances, and try to take a one size fit all approach, so to speak.
Yeah, I do remember early on, after I got my diagnosis, there was a lot of just, okay, well, I guess this is the way it is now. And it just, as much as I was trying to accept the position I was in, but I was accepting the concept of what is now, and I was applying it to the future, just across the board. Like, now I'm just never going to sleep again, and I'm going to have nightmares all the time, and I'm going to, like, there was this surrender, I guess, to the thought of what could happen versus what was actually happening.
Mm-hmm.
It took a while to get over that.
That's fixed mindset versus growth mindset. And I know that that's going to sound maybe insulting to some people, that how dare you? I'm just saying that's what it is. My growth mindset, when someone said you've got PTSD, took about 3 seconds to kick into visualizing my future on how I was going to crush it. And I didn't know how to crush it, but I knew it was going to get crushed, whatever that meant to me in my head at that time. Whereas a fixed mindset is, oh boy, I guess that's what's going to happen to me for the rest of my life. I'm never going to fix this thing because it's locked in.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not a locked in guy. I'm a go kick it in the teeth guy. And so that's kind of the mindset that I would encourage anyone to have. Nothing is fixed. Everything is available to you in the future. It's for you to shape the code in the way that you want to run your life. And you're not locked into anything other than your own beliefs.
Yeah.
And just on that as well, Shaun, because it bears on this conversation, I think that's a fantastic point about the fixed and the growth mindset. One of the biggest byproduct of having a fixed mindset is envy and insecurity as people around you are growing out of things. So if people around you are making leeways that you're not, if people around you are being successful and you're not, then it compounds everything for you. And now it starts affecting your relationships. It starts affecting your world, really, because you're not keeping up. And so therefore a mirror is being placed right in front of your face, and you are seeing your reflection, and you don't like what you see. So now you start deflecting it. It's no longer your problem. You become a victim. And once victim mentalities start kicking in there, And the deflection piece, which is a subset of victim mentality, just kind of, it's a vicious cycle you'll never get out of.
Yeah, you're right to bring that up, because that is straight up what happens for a lot of people. And for the people out there that's happening to, in the past, they didn't have an option. It was just, this is the way it is. I don't know a way out of this, and this is who I am, and this is the way the rest of my life is. But nowadays, there's people who stand in front of microphones and hand out some wisdom on how to get out of these cycles, on how to improve your life, and how to tweak things day by day so that you see some forward progress every day. But in my generation, we had none of this. Nothing. Nowadays, like today, it's all available to everyone to be able to move forward. And so no one has to be resentful of anyone moving ahead. You should only be resentful if you're not moving ahead, because you're not moving yourself ahead. Move yourself ahead 1 inch today, and you'll start loving on life.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I'm a perfect example of that, because I had a very fixed mindset for a number of years, and it wasn't until my mindset actually changed. I remember actually having arguments with my psychologist about this. She would say, post-traumatic stress, you can get to a point where you don't experience the symptoms anymore. And I was like, what? No, this is a lifelong thing that I'm going to be struggling with, et cetera, et cetera. And that was, for years I said that, up until the point that I got to a point where I could actually change the mindset. I could see the growth and then go, oh, this actually can go away. And now I'm in agreement with her, but it is a very key point. Dr. C brings up, Winterstorm makes a great point. Many people prefer to call it PTSI, post-traumatic stress injury, changes the perception of it by providing a solution. And I think that's simple, or I think it's excellent, because it's a very simple change, but it completely switches your mindset as to what it is you're dealing with, right? That's why I was saying initially it's a contentious issue of between disorder or injury or just post-traumatic stress. And then, because it really does, the words matter, and we say this all the time, is the words matter. If we got another couple comments here, anybody else got any thoughts on what we've gone over so far? Good to go? Kirby. So Dr. C, he's got a couple in here, which is awesome. So he says agoraphobia, there we go. Fear of crowds, or really escape from the area, is common symptom of PTSD. 100% it is. And he goes into add this: regular deployments have changed the game considerably for soldiers. Decades ago, they didn't go on so many deployments, but this. And actually, this is a great point, is that if you guys ever read the book On Combat by Dave Grossman, great book. Everybody should read it. One of the biggest things they found was, oh, you got it right there. Perfect. One of the things they found was the fact that multiple deployments wasn't so much the issue as the time in which spent going back and forth, right? Because even when you were World War II, where you were, at war for 3 years, there were leave portions where you were separating from the front line and coming back and doing other stuff. But the key point was that you were with your team for a long period of time and allowing you to decompress with the people over a period of time and then reintegrate with society, versus being in a war zone and then being at home at upwards of 24 hours of just going back and forth. And very difficult for the brain to process going from that high level stress, high tempo, to we need to go get the groceries.
I do have a point on that, and then I'd
Give
like to redirect Steve, because I'm sure you will have some observations on what Chance just stated. But I'll say this, and it's because I'm looking at Seb and thinking, when we went to Haiti there last time, and when we came back, when I landed and got back to my house, my family was like, how was it? Blah, 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 blah. And I was like, I just need 24 hours. And so when I say that, it's not that I don't need to hear whale music and namaste. I just need 24 hours to myself. And not to myself in the sense of no one get around me, or I can't be in a crowd, or I don't like fireworks. It's just I need 24 hours just to think about it, just to contemplate it, just to sink into it and think about what happened, What did I learn from it? What was good? What was bad? Wonder what Seb's doing. All of those things. Like, those things have to happen for me anyway. When I came back from Haiti, if I would not have gone through that, I just need 24 hours, then I'd still be wondering, I wonder how Seb's doing. And those are all unsolved things that reside within me. If I can't get to work on those, I wonder how Seb's doing. And so if that's chirping away in the back of my brain, unsolved, it's, to me, I've called it cognitive dissonance. I like to solve things. I like to tie my shoelaces. I like to close the loop. I like to move forward, not leaving unleft work behind me. That's just the way I am. And if I can't do those things, I don't fall apart. I just like to get them done eventually. And the sooner I can get them done, the better. So, to my point, coming back from Haiti, which was not like a mega operational deployment, there's still enough going on that I want 24 hours to myself, for lack of a better term, to process that. Now, with that said, Steve, what are your thoughts on the multiple deployments modern versus what Grossman is referring to in the transport ships coming back from Europe?
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, guys. Well, I think, I hope you don't mind, but I want to take the conversation in a different direction, but I still think it's the same pathway. We often talk about after, what happens after. I want to bring up what we should be doing before, because I'm
fantastic.
like, let's talk about prevention, and let's keep guys, well, people, in the fight as long as possible. And then when they get home, let's keep them healthy. You've probably never heard this, gentlemen, or if you have, I don't want to reiterate it, but one of the big things when I train police officers and school medicine is early aggressive pain control. Who would have thought that early aggressive pain control would be such a key factor in healing down the road? Last 10 years, that's become a huge thing. But I've kind of got a few points on what can help us be a little bit more resilient. And this is, I was so lucky to be a kid that grew up in a small town in Alberta with amazing parents who kept me in hockey and sports, and I got to do all the things I wanted. I had healthy food, and I really think that resilience starts with our parents. And my first thing is, let's try to be good parents and raise our kids to be ready for the world. The next one is good leadership. Seb, you mentioned it earlier. I have your name right beside mentorship and leadership. If you have subordinates, it's your job to help develop them to be able to kind of maybe withstand a mental health injury a little bit better. I think there's a couple keys on how to deal with this. The first one is training. If you're well trained and you succeed in the moment, you're going to feel good about it, as well as education. If you can provide subordinates with a good book like On Combat or No Easy Day or any of these education pieces on resilience, you're setting them up for success down the road. We also have to give people that are learning, and I'll use the example of the military, a sergeant major. Or sorry, I'm going to go back to my first experiences in the military. The first guy who taught me how to be a warrior was in battle school, and he didn't just teach us about guns and marching around in the forest. He taught us how to mop a floor properly. He taught us how to treat each other. He taught us how to be a team. He taught us how to be nice. And those things are good. What he also did was take care of us when we were learning new things. He helped us out. If you have subordinates who are about to experience their first traumatic incident, you make sure that when they go into that situation, they trust you implicitly and that they know that you're going to take care of them doing it. You don't take, I use this analogy with some of the firefighters I work with last night. You don't take a probationary firefighter to their first cardiac arrest and throw them in there and say, get after it, kid. You go in there and you show them how it's done. And then when it's over, you make sure that they understand that it's okay to feel however you feel. Are you upset? Yeah, okay, let's talk about it. Are you not upset? Perfect. If that changes, let's have a conversation. Those are the big things that I think we can do to prevent some of this stuff from happening. But again, it's not a magic wand that we just wave that will have this magic preparedness package that will keep people from suffering a post-traumatic stress injury.
Mm-hmm.
Those are cracking points.
Yeah, and Steve, I'm going to go out and support you on that. And that recruiting has a massive role to play as well in having the conversation that with this new career comes new responsibility with respect to how you're going to invest in your resilience, whether it's through physical, the spiritual, the mental and emotional, and the relationship realm. All of those things are not coming naturally to most people, and they have to be discussed. Once you're in a heightened state of emotional distress, it is very difficult to comprehend and implement new processes. So even if you had the pillars following an incident, you are now reactionary and you are behind. And it's going to be very, very difficult to overcome the harm that's been done. And we do that all the time. Invest in your wellness ahead of time so you don't get an illness later. And so that's a critical point. One of the differences, Shaun, Grossman speaks about is, well, he actually speaks about a variety of different things, but let's look at it this way. If you are in a known war zone with a known enemy and you know where that enemy generally is, and on the left side is the enemy, on the right side is your crew, and when you're off somewhere on permission, you're not at war. It's a very different scenario than, say, guerrilla warfare, such as what the Afghanistan and the Iraq vet experience, where you don't know where the enemy is. So the brain has this thing where it magnifies risk, obviously, as soon as you're afraid of something. So if you are afraid of something, but you don't get to actually physically see it, you are now magnifying the risk associated with this. So if your deployment is coming back, and this is the type of circumstances you're going to be faced with, it creates an incredible amount of stress, and people are experiencing post-traumatic stress injuries and occupational stress injuries as a result of the amount of time that they spend worrying about the unknown. And this is why the rates of occupational stress injuries are so high in policing, for example, as you don't know where the enemy is. You just drive around and somebody in there wants to kill you and the rest of them are super nice, And so it's no different than driving in Afghanistan and having the IED, because that's another thing that wasn't really common during the previous wars, is IED on the rate at the rate at which they were used in Afghanistan and Iraq. Again, incredibly stressful and incredibly catastrophic when they went off, right? So creating an incredible amount of stress.
So maybe just we've got just over 10 minutes left. Maybe we could come up with some actionable items in respect to PTSD for anyone who's listening right now. Steve has already cracked out some points. Though what you just said, Seb, made me think of one of the challenges that you just indicated is someone living in the near future. So they're driving their patrol car and they're thinking, what's around that corner? What's in that building? Who's going to do what? Who's going to in 5 minutes, and etc. That's all near future thinking. And it's understandable. Who hasn't done it? But the workaround, of course, which is so obvious but hard to do, is live in the present. Be mindful. Don't worry about what's around the corner. Don't even worry about what's happening in a second from now, because you'll deal with it when it happens in the now. And in order to do that, you need training. You need to have confidence. You need to be capable. You need to be able to manage the circumstances that are happening in the now. And so, in respect to PTSD, for anyone out there who is struggling with PTSD, get tools to start countering PTSD, live in the now and start employing your tools in the now. Start refining the now and your tools in the now in order to get better at not dealing with the problem around the corner.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Seb, you got something?
I was just gonna say there's some unspoken complexities here that we're not qualified to speak to, but there are people that it's preferable for them to not be in the now on account of how their circumstances were. So I'm not gonna say, obviously, and Shaun is not saying that, but it's not all or nothing. It depends on you, and you're gonna have to take the steps required to identify what that process is to you, not to the next person.
That's good clarity, Seb.
Yeah.
I don't have any answers, even for myself sometimes. So what we are throwing out is ideas or some options or some tools or some actionable items that may or may not work for you. You got any other thoughts? Steve, do you have any ideas on this?
Yeah, if I could just kind of throw one more analogy in there, guys, and I know we're getting short on time, but this one I think is important because this is the circumstance where in my experience that I've seen most people really negatively affected by poor mental health after an incident, and that's failure or perceived failure. And Winston Churchill has a quote about God tapping you on the shoulder and you being able to step up and do good or do bad in what could be the finest moment in your life. And there's a big difference after a significant event, whether you can look yourself in the mirror and know that you did everything in your power to be ready for that moment and still failed, or whether you're looking at yourself in the mirror after that event and you know you missed something, that you didn't train properly, that you didn't check your gear, that you weren't ready to go. And if I could just give an analogy to kind of put it in play, is it in the fire department, we're first aiders. I was a JTF2 combat medic with a scope of practice as big as you can possibly have, but it was little things, the basics. And the most important things for a first aider working in the city of Edmonton are a tourniquet and your bag valve mask. And a bag valve mask is something that we use to ventilate patients when they're not breathing on their own. And there's 3 sizes of them. There's an adult one, there's one for a child, let's say ages 1 to 12, and then there's one for tiny little babies. And this mask is supposed to be checked every Saturday or every Tuesday when we look at our cabinets. And I check it every day. And I've been to a handful of fire halls, more fire halls than I would like to count, where I check that little baby mask and it's not working. It's either deflated or the bag is corroded. And I always bring it up this way, that think of this situation, folks. You go to an unresponsive 28-day-old infant who's not breathing, and this patient dies. Now imagine that you showed up, and when you tried to breathe for that child, you couldn't do it. You are going to suffer a catastrophic injury because in your heart of hearts, you're going to know that you missed something. But if you show up to that call and all your tools are well taken care of, your kits are organized, you've been training and studying and having good culture, you might lose sleep for a couple weeks, but eventually, hopefully, everything will return to normal. So if we have good culture, we train and we take care of our gear, we can help prevent ourselves from getting sick down the road.
You literally do your best.
Let's get. As he was talking, I was hoping you were going to bring your cup
I almost did, but I didn't want to spoil the moment.
That was very well said, Steve. Thank you very much. I was actually going to agree with all your points in that. Training is the key, I think. Like ahead of the time training, and from my own experience, the issues that I suffer the most with were ones that I was never trained for. The difficult things, the really stressful, high issue related portions of my job, like looking for IEDs or scanning for buried mines and stuff, that doesn't bother me. That's where I've had the most training. So I think that's a fantastic point. And it also comes into afterwards, in that even if you do get a diagnosis or you're having issues, it's still training, right? You are still, for me to be able to go to Costco on a Sunday afternoon, took training, and it took practice, and it took work and dedication and time to get to that point. It wasn't like I couldn't do it yesterday, now I can. It was a developed skill set.
There's also another aspect to that Costco moment, skills training, getting used to it and all of that good stuff. But the piece that is worth mentioning is you got to want to go. Like you got to want to be in it.
Yep.
And why are you going to Costco? Because either you want a deal or you like a particular protein bar or whatever the case is, but you got to want to go. If you don't want to go, then you're always going to be struggling with the crowd. And so if you want to make changes before you consider stepping into Costco, you've got to know why you're stepping into Costco. Once you know your why, then you can get on with the how. Once you know the how, then you can get on with categorizing the amount of intensity that you're going to apply against that why and how. And if you want your deal on Kerrygold butter in Costco, you'll make it happen. You know what I'm saying?
Very true. 100%.
You know what you're talking about, Shaun, here, and not to go against what you said because it's all sensical. I would say that what you are doing is you're actually tying the purpose with you going to Costco. So even if you don't want to go to Costco, you know it's the right thing to do on account of what you are trying to accomplish. That is a very different conversation. If you wait for yourself to want to go to Costco and you have an actual block with Costco, there isn't a single day where you'll wake up wanting to go to Costco.
Mm-hmm.
But if you tie your reward to what it's going to bring you if you go to Costco, now you want to go to Costco on account of what it's going to bring you.
That Kerrygold
buddy.
butter. That Kerrygold butter.
100%.
Well, I got a couple comments here I just want to hit, but and then we'll do some final thoughts. I think it's been a fantastic show so far. This topic is so massive. An hour really isn't anywhere near enough time to talk about it, but I think we've got some really solid points for a lot of people out there. Dr. C says, telling a client their diagnosis is constantly debated among mental health professionals. That's good to know because I didn't know that. Because for some, it makes it worse. For others, it helps. Depends on the client, hence the complexity.
Agreed.
Yep.
100%.
And then he says, yeah, exactly. Diagnosis labeling can decrease the empowerment of the person. 100%. Winter Storm, to Shaun's point, do you need to actually have the diagnosis to be able to help people through it? Or can someone who isn't experiencing it be able to navigate you through it? Now, that's a big question. I'm going to let the doctor answer it. He says, in my opinion, you don't, Winter Storm. I would recommend a therapist that specializes in it because it is different than other mental health injuries. 100%. From my experience, once I actually started seeing a trauma specialist, things changed immediately on how, and that could just be my perception of the fact that I'm seeing a trauma specialist. It could also be that they're hired, trained in a different manner or different level, all that good stuff. And then, of course, the one thing I do want to tell everybody is that talk therapy is not the only thing out there, right? EMDR, CBT, psychedelics, equine therapy, adventure therapy, like there are a myriad of ways to get through it. But it all starts with you got to want to be better at the very core of it. And then you got to do your best. So any final thoughts on anything we've gone over so far? Let's start with Seb.
No, I think it was a great conversation. Thanks, Steve, for being here. It was very, very valuable, and hopefully we'll get to do that again with you on here. That was very impressive.
Oh, I'll make sure of it. Steve, any final thoughts?
Thank you so much for having me, gentlemen, and thanks for having a candid conversation about this. Too often we talk about this subject with these ridiculously unacceptable big giant mittens, and then it's not a good conversation. And just remember, if you're a veteran of the police service or the military or a paramedic, always find purpose in your life. Always give yourself a purpose and enjoy your hobbies.
I like that. Enjoy your hobbies. Shaun, final thoughts?
My final thought is this. Why doesn't Steve have a Shure microphone in front of him so that he can now be a regular podcaster? Why is he not a regular podcaster?
I was going to say he should just take over.
He should just take over. I really appreciate your conversation. I really appreciate what you brought to the topic today. I would really hope to see you in the near future again over here on The Collective. So thanks for taking the time.
My pleasure, gentlemen. Thank you.
It's fantastic. Shaun and I were talking about this last night, was the fact that it's pretty cool to talk to the people that we get to talk to on this show, because they bring such a level of, I guess, just fantastic information. And it's really awesome to have cool people on the show every day. Really. And I really thank you, Steve, for jumping on here. We are going to have you on here more often for sure. Whether you like it or not.
It's already been decided.
Yeah, you're good to go. You don't actually get a choice in the matter. We're just bringing you in.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. These are important topics, and like I said, we need to discuss them. The kitchen table is sometimes the best place to fix problems. Why not make it cyberspace too?
I agree. And to that point, buddy, we're just four guys sitting at the kitchen table trying to figure out things that we don't fully understand. But it's through the four of us that we'll always get further ahead at the kitchen table.
Yeah, 100%.
Awesome.
So we've talked about post-traumatic stress today. We've talked about some pretty amazing topics through the last many days, and we got much more coming up. So do stick with us through the rest of the month, as June is Men's Mental Health Month. We're going to be talking about it all month. I'm actually very excited to bring you this because a lot of these conversations, as you guys said, aren't done enough, or they're done with kids' gloves or packing foam. I don't know, but something not the way it's supposed to be done. So as we all, man, and my brain just died. You know what?
Learn, build, and grow.
Learn, build, grow. We'll call it a night. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.
Chimo.
Oh, man.
Yeah.